Hey guys, Mr. Ridgway here. So today we are going to be dealing in our dual credit class with Vicious Virginia and the Cheapskate Chesapeake as a start here to our southern colonies. Number one, you'll want to go and get the warm-up done for our particular classes. Again, make sure you click on your one, which one that is. And then once you do that, we'll get going. Okay? So what we're going to be trying to do in this block is we're going to be trying to basically kind of accomplish three particular things. The first is describing the actual southern colonies and how they kind of began in context, and then looking at some of their successes and failures. Once we've done that, then a little bit later, we'll be talking about how we can analyze the argument of a text when we look at Love and Hate in Jamestown with a book that is by Dave Price. So, we have first, for our first activity, something called the Expanse. And what you're going to be doing in this activity is to help us kind of put us in the mindset of Europeans' early kind of colonizations efforts. We're going to try to imagine, plan, think about the possibility of humans going out and colonizing somewhere in space. So what you're going to do is you're going to think about one of four possible locations that you might go colonize. We have the belt, Mars, the moon, or somewhere in deep, deep space that is unknown. Now, depending on where you decide to colonize, you're going to have to think about things like labor, resources, profitability. How do you want to govern your colony based on things like risk, reward, or perhaps your own personal choices or beliefs. So you're going to click right here to get this worksheet. We're going to go ahead and open this up now so you can see that. And then please circle which of the, and this should say four, colonies that you will attempt to found. So just you can bold it if you want to. So we change this language to bold. Considering your choice, what are the potential risks of an attempted colonization effort? So think about logistics, resources, personnel, lasting legacies. I don't know, maybe a couple sentences. Considering your choice, what are the potential rewards of an attempted colonization effort? So think about things beyond just gold and glory. Try to give us specifics. Now, something about a colony is that you're going to have to attract investors who are going to help fund the trip and the setup of it. And how are these investors going to make their money back by basically funding your trip? And then once they're founded, how will the colony be governed? Meaning, who are you going to decide is in charge? How are you going to decide that? What kind of labor is going to be used? Wages, slavery, mechanization, don't know. And then that should kind of complete this activity. The whole point is that we're kind of giving a chance to brainstorm as time goes on. So once you've done that, then we are going to go on to our next activity. Now, this is going to be up to you. You can pick either to do the mini lesson on Virginia, which I will do first, or if you'd like to, you can skip ahead and you can do the mini lesson on Maryland. Just be aware, whatever one you do decide to pick, I will come back, or I will need you to come back later and do it on your own. Okay, so whatever one we might have done in class, you'll probably need to go and do the other one independently. So we're going to go ahead and do Virginia first and get started with that one. Again, the notes are right here if you need them. So how does geography affect human societies, and then what motivates human exploration? Are two questions. And again, please feel free to pause this video at any time so you can write everything down. So first of all, let's deal with where the Chesapeake is. The Chesapeake is just a name that we give for anywhere that is connected to the Chesapeake Bay. So primarily this is Maryland, Virginia, a little bit, I guess, of North Carolina, perhaps, but really those two colonies. And it's right kind of in between like the middle and southern colonies. And it is the first place that is colonized by England, okay, which is why we're pointing this out. Now, let's talk about the first attempt to make a colony. Okay, Jamestown was the second attempt by the English to actually set up a rather permanent civilization in Chesapeake Bay. The first attempt was Roanoke, which did not turn out so well, but as you're about to see, it's not like this one goes great either. So Jamestown was settled by 120 gentlemen, which means at this time, okay, the word gentleman means upper class men. Now this is funded by the Virginia Company, and what that means is that is a group of folks who are kind of investing their money in hopes that they will get a profitable return. And again, we're talking about people who have invested who are back in England. Now, their goal here is threefold for the Virginia company. They're there to explore, to convert natives to Christianity, and primarily, especially for the people going along there, to find gold. And it struggles at first to become a successful colony. What I'm going to need you to do is click down here so you can actually access this video and watch it. It's a good horrible history skit that I encourage you to check out. In terms of Jamestown, what happens? Well, basically the summary that you saw there in that video, if you watched it, was that disease, war, they don't know and they are not wanting to cultivate food when they arrive, kills nearly all of the early settlers, and that's when very, very drastic measures get taken. A young mercenary and captain by the name of John Smith is going to take charge. Smith was actually imprisoned on the way over there for basically being a jerk. He kind of had the tendency to rub people the wrong way, and when people start dying all over the place, he's one of the people that sort of steps up and kind of takes ownership of the colony. And Smith's rule basically is if you do not work, you do not eat. And besides that, he either out of just a sense of conflict or negotiating skill helps negotiate with the local Powhatan tribe for food, and the colony manages to survive its first winter. Eventually, though, Smith is going to suffer basically a tragic gunpowder accident. He does not get shot like in the movie Pocahontas, nor does he actually go and kiss Pocahontas like that movie shows. He basically gets third-degree burns all over his body, and that's kind of the end of John Smith. The person who really saves Jamestown is another John by the name of John Rolfe, and he is going to Rolfe is going to introduce West Indies tobacco to Jamestown, and it is insanely profitable. John Rolfe, also, fun fact, is the guy who will marry Pocahontas. When tobacco kind of takes hold in Virginia, that is really what becomes the colony's main focus. So again, it kind of starts off as this kind of like, we want gold, we want to convert natives, we want to explore, but then it just all becomes about tobacco because it makes so much money. Now, in terms of labor, early on, okay, the labor system in Virginia is mostly funded by indentured servitude, okay, as well as people would pay a head right, which means they would pay their own trip over and then they would kind of be just their own free white men. But let's talk about what these indentured servants are. So indentured servants are Brits who basically made a deal in order to get over to the colony that in exchange for this free ride, they would provide 5 to 7 years on average of work. And then if they survived that, they would be given land of their own, maybe some basic tools to kind of start doing their own thing. And this is where immediately we start to see a divide in terms of Virginia society. There are planters who really own all the land and kind of the bourgeoisie class of their time, and then there are the indentured servants. It's a very have and have-nots kind of society, and the indentured servitude indentured servitude system is really designed to keep indentured servants an almost near perpetual, like a kind of like quasi-slavery. So, for example, like if you decided to break a law while you were break part of your contract by your indentured servitude, they could just simply reset the number of days that you were working. It was legal to whip or beat your indentured servants, and essentially what will happen is that after this system gets changed for some reasons that we'll get into here in a second, is that this system of labor is simply just applied to black slaves when that labor system is adopted after the whole indentured servitude period. Now, the reason why indentured servants are used was because very, very few survived the 5 to 7 year contract period. And the reason is number one, the workload was incredibly brutal, okay? And then second, they're in the Tidewater part of Virginia, and it is just rife with disease and not a whole lot of fun, healthy times. And so having somebody who dies, again, you have to think of this as a kind of like a business planter perspective, having somebody who dies 2 to to 3 years into their contract is perfect, because then you don't have to pay them the land that they're due. So it's just free labor. But the problem is that as these planters begin to acquire more and more land, they start to move out of these tidewater areas of Virginia, and they start living longer. And so this type of labor, where you would have to give these men their land after they worked the 5 to 7 years, simply becomes totally unprofitable. And that is when and it takes time, where black slaves from the Caribbean and then eventually Africa and South America become a much, much better long-term investment for planters. Now, ideally, I'm sure planters would have been more than welcome to use Native Americans as a labor source, but there's two problems with that. Number one, they're also dying of disease. And number two, they could always run away to neighboring tribes and other groups that they could escape to. And so utilizing black slaves for labor is a much better, in terms of like long-term efficient system for planters, as opposed to this indentured servitude practice that they've been doing before. And this is really where we start to see the first signs of a kind of like white solidarity between rich and poor whites in the southern colonies. This idea that you can use this thing called race as a justification or a reason for enslavement, at least for the planters. Okay, so that'll finish us up kind of for your introduction to Virginia. When you're ready, you can click to go on. I'm actually going to go back a little bit, and I'm going to backtrack to talking about Maryland. Now, again, if you don't want to do this, that's totally fine. You can come back to it later, but I will expect that you do it at some time. So let's talk about Maryland. Same introduction with the Chesapeake. Again, it's this area right here near Washington, D.C., Virginia, etc., anywhere that touches the Chesapeake Bay. And let's talk about how then we get Maryland. So the background to Maryland, and this does happen with many, many colonies that are in the soon-to-be United States, is that it was a gift of land. So King Charles I of England, you can see him right up there, who later does get decapitated after the whole English Civil War thing, was a secret sympathizer with Catholics. And back in 1632, before the whole decapitation thing, he decides to grant lands to one of his Catholic aristocrats, a man by the name of Cecilius Calvert, or as he's also known, Lord Baltimore, which is how we get the capital of Maryland. And he basically gives them this land for him to use as he wished. Now, again, notice like you're just granting this huge tract of land which people are already occupying. And again, for most English people, they just don't care, right? They don't factor that. So what Baltimore is going to do is he's going to set up this colony as a refuge for Catholics. And if this sounds very, very strange, remember that England is extremely, extremely Protestant and very, very suspicious of Catholics. And so this is like it's like a zoo that Catholics can be safe in. It's a refuge for them. Okay, and really kind of what we see that happens with the colony is although Cecilius Calvert, Lord Baltimore, really wanted to be in total power of it, the population of Maryland, especially the wealthy, really wanted more of a say in how the colony is actually going to be governed once people get there. And this has a lot to do with, number one, that the fact that most people in the colony are actually not Catholic, they're still Protestant, and they didn't share his particular Catholic, place, rehabilitation place and refuge kind of cause that he had. And they are given that power, and they create a representative assembly. And eventually what's going to happen is that there's going to be a Toleration Act passed later that's going to grant all Christians religious freedom in the colony. So it kind of becomes, again, a non-issue in some ways, simply based on the population. Now, like Virginia, Maryland's going to kind of shift its intention of founding. So it originally starts off as this kind of like Catholic refuge, then it becomes religiously tolerant, and then just like Virginia, it's going to quickly become focused on making money from tobacco. And again, this area seems just really, really good for growing it, and it's extremely profitable. Again, talking about this West Indies tobacco that was brought by John Rolfe. So again, just kind of to summarize here with Maryland, a colony that was originally designed to protect Catholics become a colony just that eventually becomes not about that, and then completely changes to focusing on growing and exporting tobacco. It's a quite dramatic change. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to do take a moment and do like a little graphic organizer. And so if you click here on this worksheet, I would like you to take some time and to fill out the bottom 2 rows of our colony chart here. And you can see that it's pretty straightforward. What was the original purpose of the colony? What was the eventual purpose? Are there any notable events, peoples, concepts, things that we should be familiar with? And then insert a meaningful picture using clip art or by drawing. Once you do that, then, okay, and again, you'll need to do that for both Maryland and Virginia for next lesson, no matter which one you did, you can go with me on to the next activity, which is what we'll wrap up with. So something that we're going to have to do in this class, because we don't utilize the textbook that often, or at least snippets from it, is that we're going to be reading some books by some actual historians. And what we're going to be doing here is actually taking a crack at our first one today. And it's a book called Love and Hate in Jamestown by a guy by the name of Dave Price wrote the book. And so what I'd like you to do before going on here is go ahead and read this slide. I trust that you can read this on your own. And once you've done that, okay, brainstorm 5 things you think that you might need to do when you look at an author's argument, or specifically a historian's argument, okay? And again, this is all about how can we make our own arguments, getting better at researching our own, kind of deconstructing them in some good critical thinking. Now, once you've done that, take a look at this page that is here on my screen. So ideally, with every argument that we can kind of think of it like a structure or like a house. And we'll kind of start at the bottom then. Every argument in history that is ever done by any author ever rests upon the foundation that has been done by the authors before it. And that means that they have to, for example, acknowledge the works that other authors have done, or perhaps they'll just reject them. Maybe they'll build upon them. Maybe they just, again, tear the whole house down, right? Or they modify it. It's kind of up to each kind of particular author. Now from there, okay, really what you should kind of understand about arguments in history is that just like arguments and, evidence in any other class, it's going to rest upon, the evidence that you have, right? Are there compelling primary or other secondary sources that are going to help confirm what this person says is true? And once that is done, then we can kind of start to look at, from your perspective as a student, what it actually means to analyze an author's argument. So first of all, here's kind of how we do this in steps. Can we identify what their central claim or thesis is? What are they trying to prove that is true? And if there's some kind of claim, it's going to be a very kind of declarative sounding statement. That's kind of what we're looking for. Once we've done that, then, this kind of relates to the evidence part, what's the evidence that they're going to use that's going to prove that that argument is the case? So, for example, if I give you the syllogism, which means argument, all dogs bark, right? And then it's under that, Jamie is a dog, as our evidence. You could therefore claim Jamie barks, right? We can kind of see how the argument is constructed step by step. Then we can start to kind of look at their sources and reasoning. We can start to kind of make judgments about their particular argument and whether or not we accept it as valid. Are there limitations? Are there things that are missing? Have they made assumptions that that in this case they might have left things out or added too much in, or they just simply don't have the source material to back up what they're going for? The other thing that I would tell you is kind of like a house as well, is that every argument or every book that a historian is going to write is made for somebody or something. Okay, and what I mean by that is, for example, like when you're going and looking for a house, that house is trying to make a statement. It's trying to attract a certain kind of person to it. And for example, like, is there something in there in the book that is targeted to a specific audience, right? Is this a popular work, which is one kind, which is like it's kind of made for everybody to be able to read it, and so that way it's more accessible? Or is this really a book that's a scholarly work that we're looking for, a book that's meant for perhaps 6 people ever to read, because those are the only people who really care about something that's this specific and this focused. So we kind of, again, have that divide between popular and scholarly works. And sometimes you get books that kind of blend the two. It just kind of depends. And how can you tell which is which? There's a lot of things. Sometimes it's the language that's used. If it's more like kind of linguistically accessible, it's probably going to be a more popular work. If it's about a topic that is very, very, very specific, oftentimes that'll be scholarly as opposed to popular. The other trends that you'll see is who the publisher is. If it's a publisher that's relatively unknown, that could mean that it's a scholarly work, because usually something that's going to be published by like a Random House or something like that is going to come from a much, much larger, more popular kind of publisher. Although, again, these are all things that don't necessarily prove that it's the case. What about the background of the author? Does something about that tell us if it's a popular work or a scholarly work? Perhaps the person is a professor, which could kind of give you a hint one way or the other. And then last, are there things about the work that for example, like the specificity of the argument, or does it seem like they're covering a topic that lots of people would be interested in, right? Which means that it might be more popular. So there you go. Now, other things. Again, the author is going to try to tell us, probably for a scholar or for a popular work, why we should care about it. What's interesting about their argument that's worth noting? Don't know. And then the last thing, kind of about houses, is that also realize that just like houses, historical works come in different styles. And the most recent kinds of styles are, style among historians rather, is probably the New Left. And they really focused upon big themes like race, gender, social class. They liked conflict and looking at history from the bottom up. So looking at individuals who aren't necessarily like the 1%. They're more focused on the 99% of folks. Consensus historians like to talk about ideas. They're kind of a different breed, and they like to talk about the idea of nations and groups of people. Their argument tends to be kind of more focused on big institutions and things like that, big ideas. And then Romantic historians are, again, another variation that you might stumble across. And Romantic historians kind of try to make you feel like you're there in the history. Like, you could feel the sweat dripping down your face as, when you step outside in Jamestown, right? Things kind of like that. They're not about love. It's about feeling for Romantic historians. So there you go. And what you're going to do, is you are going to be reading two of kind of books for our kind of next step in plus homework. And the first is going to be one called Love and Hate in Jamestown by David Price. And all you need to do, for this one is something very, very simple. And I'll go ahead and show you a version of it online here as I go to Schoology. And it's pretty straightforward what we're going to be trying to accomplish here. All I'd like you to do for this reading is after you, again, go to Plus Stuff and you scroll down and you will find Love and Hate in Jamestown, is after you read it, I just want you to try to highlight what you think the thesis is. That's it. And we'll just kind of start there. Okay, so that should kind of sum up your lesson for today. It's not too long of a reading, I promise. It's not too painful. Just try to highlight what you think the thesis is. Ignore my highlights. Those are ones that I've done before. But other than that, good luck, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye-bye.